Ready? We need some more microphones. Dave. Carl, do you want to come on up? And Ian, good. All right, y'all ready? Good afternoon, everyone. I want to introduce the folks that are up here with me, and then we'll get into the press conference. To my right is Weld County Coroner Carl Blesch. To my immediate right, Detective Dave Baumover from the Frederick Police Department, Chief Deputy District Attorney Steve Wrenn, Deputy District Attorney Pat Roach, and from the Frederick Police Department, Sergeant Ian Albert. Sergeant Albert has been the PIO from the Frederick Police Department. I first want to invite him up to say a few words, and then I'll comment about this morning. Sergeant Albert.
Great, thank you. Good afternoon, and thank you. I'm all here to issue this statement, and upon doing so, my agency will not be conducting any interviews or answering any questions on the matter. On behalf of the men and women of the Frederick Police Department, I would like to thank our fellow law enforcement agencies, the countless citizens, and all those who contributed to this tireless investigation. It was a combined effort in serving justice today. In the names of Shanann, Bella, Celeste, and Nico. Today I am proud of the determination that was put forth by all those who worked with us on putting this man away. His deplorable actions were fought back vigorously by honest police work, coupled with the goodwill of caring and loving people. But most importantly, however, I want to send our thoughts and prayers to Frank, Sandy, Frankie Jr., and the entire Rissick family. I don't know if you will ever receive closure on this horrific act of evil. I just pray that our efforts have brought you all one step closer in doing so. Thank you.
As you all, I'm sure, are aware, the defendant in this case this morning was sentenced to 3 consecutive life sentences, plus a 48-year sentence for the unlawful termination of a pregnancy as it relates to Nico Watts. He was also sentenced to 12 years on each of the 3 Class 3 felonies for unlawful tampering with a deceased body, those being Shanann, Bella, and Celeste. All of those counts ran consecutively for a total of 3 consecutive life sentences plus 84 years in the Department of Corrections. This afternoon, with the cooperation of the Weld County Coroner, the autopsy reports will be made available and become a public document. There are a few things that I want to talk about that you will see that are contained within those autopsy reports. I'm going to be very general at this point. I hope you understand, out of respect for the Rissick family who is still present. Part of the reason that we kept these sealed were for the following reasons. You will see in the autopsy report of Shanann Watts that forensic toxicology testing indicated that in spleen blood there was a blood alcohol level of 0.128. I want to be abundantly and very, very clear about this. This does not mean that she consumed alcohol, nor that she was intoxicated. We have consulted with the Weld County Coroner's Office. We have conducted with the forensic experts at the Colorado Bureau of Investigation. To a person, they have all indicated to us that that blood alcohol level is very, very consistent with normal human decomposition based upon the location and the manner that Shanann and Nico's bodies were buried. Secondly, you will see in the autopsy reports of Bella and Celeste a number of different substances, I think is probably the way, Mr. Blesch, that I want to address those. We have had those examined by both expert chemists as well as the coroner's office because we wanted to make sure that all of those substances could be attributed to the crude oil and the water that their bodies were found in and nothing more. The forensic experts confirmed for us that all of the substances found in those toxicology reports are consistent with being submerged in unrefined crude oil. Mr. Blesch, any other comments you want to make about that at this point?
Covered it well, sir.
Thank you. Other than that, I'm happy to take questions. Obviously, from our perspective, justice was more than served this morning. The defendant is now headed exactly where he belongs, which is a life sentence in prison without the possibility of parole. So I'm happy to take questions.
Can you shed some light on parole were killed?
I'll certainly call upon Mr. Blesch. Also, what I can tell you is that because of a whole host of reasons, not the least of which is we're not operating in the CSI TV world. Oftentimes, we can't determine exactly when or a time frame for cause or time of death. Particularly, I think that was complicated by where all of the different bodies were found and the amount of time that passed before their remains were recovered.
I agree.
So how much time?
Well, we know that they were deposited in the locations where they were found in the early morning hours of August 13th. They were recovered on August 16th. That's the best I can tell you from a timing.
The girlfriend you referenced in court, can you give us a better idea of her role in the investigation, how forthcoming she was, and how she helped?
She originally came forward and spoke to investigators on her own volition. Prior to the time, unfortunately, that she came in and spoke with investigators, she had deleted all of the information off of her phone that had any connection between her and Chris Watts. That hampered the investigation. That hampered our ability to get that electronic digital connection between the two. She was interviewed on multiple occasions. I believe that for the most part she was forthcoming in the course of those investigations. We don't have any reason to believe that she had any prior knowledge or involvement in the death of Shanann, Bella, Celeste, and Nico. I think that's the best way I can answer that. Yes, sir.
You're leaving the door open for Chris Watts to make a statement in the future and hopefully answer questions. What information is it that you're specifically looking for?
How and why? And I don't think he'll ever answer those questions. Like I said in the courtroom this morning, and I think that the Rourke family said it very, very well as well, I don't think he will ever tell us. I don't think he will give an honest assessment of why he did what he did, how he did what he did. I intentionally called upon him to see if he would answer those questions in the courtroom this morning. Both his mother and through their attorney, his father, said that they hope that he will be honest and come clean someday and give us an account of what happened, because I think, like I said this morning, those are the questions that will always haunt anyone who was involved in the investigation, and I don't think that there is ever going to be a satisfactory answer for anyone, not the least of which is the Rourke family.
You mentioned several times in court that this was a deliberate act.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you believe it's a deliberate act? Do you believe he planned this before the night of to kill his family?
I don't have any information about any pre-planning or anything like that. Obviously, something like this, in my mind, doesn't just happen on the spur of the moment. But what I alluded to this morning, as it related specifically to Shanann, was the amount of time it takes for one human being to strangle another. And perhaps Mr. Blesh wants to comment on the timing as well. That demonstrates an incredible intent to cause someone's death. He did that 3 times. So to say that this was anything other than a deliberate, intentional killing is inaccurate, to say the least. Yes, sir.
You described Mrs. Watts as, it took a long time for her to die. Was there any defensive wounds on Mr. Watts, and can you have any evidence if she was asleep?
Take that.
He had one small mark on his neck that was observed the night he was originally interviewed. We don't know if that's related or not, but other than that, no. We had him photographed from head to toe that night, and nothing was observed that would be consistent with injuries to him as a result of a struggle.
Yeah, go ahead.
The original plea deal isn't the one you guys reached today, correct? Can you elaborate on what that would have been?
To be clear, there was only ever one plea deal, and that's the one that his attorneys brought to us. The deal, for lack of a better word, and I frankly despise that word, no offense, the agreement that was reached was he would plead guilty to every count we charged him with. In exchange, if he pled guilty to each and every count in the complaint information, we would not seek the death penalty. That was an offer brought to us by the defense. That's when, I've talked about this before, Mr. Wrenn and I felt compelled to get on a plane and go see the Rourkes in North Carolina, because that was a conversation that I was only going to have with them face to face. Go ahead, Carol.
There's a lot made about DNA on the Legal next. Now that we know they were smothered, did that ever come into play? DNA on their necks?
No, it didn't. Yeah. Sorry, I meant,
Oh, yes.
yeah, we'll go back behind first.
There's a letter that's circulating around in social media that apparently Chris sent his family a week prior to the I would have never hurt my daughters. Is there anything to that? Is that legitimate? And it seems to me it shows that he was planning this at least a week ahead of time.
You're seeing a lot of puzzled looks up here because none of us have ever heard that. I've never seen that on social media. I confirmed just by the look on his face with Detective Baumover, we have never seen and nor heard of any such letter or its existence before. I'm sure that if it was in any way, shape, or form real, we would have heard about it. Go ahead.
When you were describing some of those very gruesome and horrific details, the judge himself even seemed to be a little bit emotional about that.
Right.
Can you talk to us about what that's like for you standing there and seeing him have that kind of reaction?
It's not something that I relished. Mr. Wrenn and I and Mr. Miller, the assistant DA, met at my house yesterday for several hours to talk through the comments that we wanted to make. And we all recognized that in order for the court to impose a just sentence, a fair sentence under the circumstances, that he had to know as much information as we could give him in a respectful fashion. Like I said, he had never read most of that. He had seen an affidavit which had some of the very preliminary information that Detective Baumover put on paper. But I felt like it was important for the judge to understand the horror that was involved in this case. Even though in the end of the sentence, for the defendant, it's not going to matter if he gets 1 consecutive, 2 consecutive, 3 consecutive life sentences. It doesn't matter in the end what number is attached to the end of those. It certainly matters to the Rourke family. It certainly matters to law enforcement and to my office. And I hope it matters to the public. When we're saying, you know what, there is a sentence that was imposed today that is reflective of the actions he took as to each and every one of his victims. Yeah, go ahead.
If I'm remembering correctly, you all searched the location where the bodies were found before Mr. Watts had admitted to you all. How did you determine the location of the bodies?
GPS.
Well, how did you know where to look?
On his work truck, he had a GPS device that showed the path of travel that he took when he left his home that morning. It showed at various increments the time that it would have taken him to get to various spots. So the CBI, FBI, Frederick police knew where he had gone immediately after leaving his home that morning, which caused some of the initial searches with drones and foot searches. Only after he gave us that information did they have a more specific place to look.
Did he appear to text his coworker that he could take the morning shift before or after he murdered his son?
There were text messages on Sunday afternoon, a text message, I should say, between he and a coworker talking about the work schedule. The investigation that law enforcement conducted indicated that wasn't necessarily out of the ordinary, but in conjunction with everything else we know, became an important fact for us in his efforts to have time to dispose of the bodies in the manner in which he did. Yeah, go ahead.
I was curious if during your investigation, if you guys found any evidence, anything suggesting that he'd have violent tendencies?
No.
Any mental problems or even low intelligence?
No, none of the above. Yeah, Kevin.
It sounded like from the statement of Mr. and Mrs. Watson, they may have met with you or people from your office over the weekend. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure.
What you shared with them, what you talked about?
Mr. Wrenn met with him.
When the court issued its order recognizing them as victims under the Victim Bill of Rights, our office agreed to meet with them, and I met with them for several hours last night with their attorney that was present in the courtroom today and one of our victim witness assistants. We had what I consider to be a good conversation. It was awkward and tough in some respects for obvious reasons, but I think ultimately they wanted to know the facts that we knew, and they wanted to know what was going to come out today. And they felt like they had been deprived of that information, and so consistent with our obligations under the statute, I provided them with that information, and I think it changed their perspective a little bit on what was going to happen today.
As you know, a week ago they were questioning whether their son actually had done all of these things. Did you feel like this sort of brought them to a place in terms of how they were thinking about it?
I do. I think in the middle of that conversation, they came to a realization about the extent of the evidence that we had and why we were making the decisions we made, why we charged them with the things that we charged him with, why we were so convinced that he committed these crimes and that it didn't happen the way that Chris Watts had initially told the police. And so I can't speak for them per se, but my impression from our conversation was that, and I think it's consistent with what they said in court today, is that they're in a little bit different place emotionally as to what they feel their son did, and they're trying to get their head around that, which has been difficult and understandably so.
Yes, please.
Watts originally gave a narrative as in the arrest affidavit. Did he ever give a different story after that?
No. The story that you all have had from the affidavit in which he falsely claimed that Shanann had responsibility for the death of the two girls was the only statement that he gave until his pleas of guilty in the courtroom.
And then was a PSI ever done or any psychological evaluation?
No. Well, there was no PSI done. There was no reports done between the time of his guilty plea and today's sentencing hearing. Yes?
The judge mentioned that this is one of the most vicious crimes he's ever encountered. I was wondering how you would characterize this crime over the course of your career.
Exactly the same. Absolutely horrifying. All of us standing up here, I think, have dealt with a number of serious crimes, but when you take a look at this one and you take a look at the death of those children, and like I said this morning, the death of Shanann, none of these things had to happen. And the manner in which they were disposed of showed a complete and utter disregard for any kind of human decency at all. Yes, sir.
This started out as a missing persons case. At what point did Chris Watts become a suspect?
Very, very early on. Many of the things that he was saying just weren't quite adding up. The Frederick Police Department, the CBI, the FBI did an amazing job from the very outset to begin to focus on him, and rightly so. I think that you saw in a matter of 3 days a gruesome triple homicide, including a pregnant woman, solved, is a testament to the efforts of the men and women who participated in this investigation. I think it was very clear from the outset that he was responsible for this and frankly was pulling the wool over the eyes of the media, to the extent that anybody in the media believed him, let's put it that way. Yeah.
What were some of the things that he said that weren't adding up?
Well, everything from the fact that she was, they were still in bed sleeping when he left the home in the early morning hours to go to work, yet her vehicle was still there, her car keys were still there, her wallet, her purse, her cell phone, which she never went anywhere without, were all still inside the home. The home, when law enforcement arrived, was locked up tight from the inside. The only way that the law enforcement could get in was getting Mr. Watts there with a garage door opener to let law enforcement in. There was no way anyone was going to get into that house as a stranger, do something to that family, and get back out and leave the house locked up in that manner. I think that was probably the most compelling thing that struck law enforcement almost immediately.
Phone calls.
Yeah, go ahead, Steve.
He also made some phone calls early the morning of the 13th, first to the children's school and then to a realtor, which were very odd and inconsistent with the rest of his conduct that day and what he was telling the media and police.
Is there any life insurance policies?
There is, and I know that that's going to be still the subject of some probate proceedings.
As far as the beneficiaries?
You know, off the top of my head, I can't remember. I apologize. I don't remember the answer to that question. Kevin.
Did you talk about restitution? You've got that reserved. Is there any hope that there's going to be restitution in this case? Significant restitution?
There will be significant restitution because, amongst other things, the burial expenses for Shanann, the girls, and Nico obviously would be covered under that statute. We recognize that when someone goes to prison for the rest of their life, their earning potential drops off dramatically, but a portion of any earnings that he has in the Department of Corrections will be used to help pay back that restitution to the Victims' Compensation Fund.
Would you have preferred the death penalty in this case? And if so, why did you not pursue it?
Christopher Watts certainly deserved the death penalty. We thought long and hard about it. We had a lot of discussions within our office, and what compelled me to accept the defense's offer was meeting with those folks in North Carolina. When Steve and I sat in their kitchen and we explained to their family the state of the death penalty in Colorado, the possible future of the death penalty as we knew that an election was coming up, and the likelihood that an execution would occur anytime within any of our lifetimes not being a high probability. And when I brought up the offer that had been extended to us by the defense, and when Sandy leaned across the table and looked at me very sternly and said, "And why haven't you done that yet?" that helped solidify in my mind that this family needed some closure. We were able to get that for them this morning. Yeah, go ahead.
A quick question for you. There's
Yeah.
the one camera on the family's door. Is there any other cameras within the house that would have shown anything?
No, there was they had, Shanann had a doorbell camera on her doorbell. That's the one that showed her arriving back home from the airport in the early morning hours, but there were no other cameras inside the house. There was the baby monitor that has been a lot of discussion has been had about. It did not have recording capabilities.
How instrumental was Nicole Atkinson's?
The one that's right behind you?
Do you think that maybe Chris was caught in the act because Nicole acted as quickly as she did?
I think she was absolutely instrumental. The fact that she made phone calls to the Frederick Police Department within several hours of this act and this disappearance, I think only benefited law enforcement. Being able to have law enforcement respond to that house before the defendant came back and was able to do any other cleanup or getting rid of evidence, I think was crucial to this investigation. And so she's obviously here, and I want to extend our thanks to you for that very timely response, and thank you for all you've done. Yes?
Carrie, John, do you know the orders of the death?
No, like I talked about earlier, we just weren't able to ascertain time of death as to any of these individuals. So to say that Shanann was deceased before the girls or vice versa would simply be speculation. Yeah.
You mentioned in court the emotionless, what you call emotionless interviews that Chris Watts gave to the media.
Mm-hmm.
What do you make of those now, knowing what you know?
Bald-faced lies. He stood up there and he tried to deflect attention away from his own responsibility. He lied to the public. He stood there and said he hopes his children and his wife were safe for probably the better part of 2 days, knowing full well exactly where they were, how they had passed away, and how they had gotten to where they were. Yeah.
It may be a better question for the Department of Corrections, but what is a day in the life in prison going to look like for Christopher Watts?
That's probably a better question for DOC. I know that they are an exceedingly professional organization who will see to his safety, will place him in a prison that they feel is most appropriate for him. Beyond that, I couldn't comment on that. Yeah.
You mentioned that the toxicology reports for Shanann Watts. Did you test Christopher Watts at all for drugs and alcohol the night of the murder?
We did not. When he was contacted by law enforcement, and Detective Baumover was in contact with him within a matter of an hour of the first phone call by Ms. Atkinson, there was absolutely no indication that he was under the influence of any drugs and or alcohol that would have justified any kind of testing.
I know you don't know why exactly, but can you talk about what you think the motive was, or the reason for a seemingly normal father to do something so horrific?
Like I said this morning, I think that based upon his Google searches, his cell phone searches, some of the things that he was doing while Shanann and the girls were in North Carolina, I think it became pretty obvious that he found a new love interest. And for whatever reason in his mind, divorce wasn't an option. I can't speak as to why anyone would take the steps that he did, but during the course of our investigation, other than the normal stressors of financial stress that I think most of us have, the occasional marital stress, we couldn't find anything else that was a significant enough motive to annihilate your family in the manner that he did. Yeah.
In the part when you talked about, again to your point, that partial motive, that desire to start a new fresh start, can you describe some of the evidence that you found, some of those Google
were just mentioning? What specifically?
There was everything from photographs of he and his girlfriend at the Great Sand Dunes in southern Colorado during the time that Shanann was in North Carolina. We knew that they had gone to other museums together. They had gone to bars and restaurants together. Like I said this morning, he had done searches dealing with secluded vacation spots in Aspen that he was planning on apparently taking her to. He was researching jewelry. He was doing all of that kind of research that you would think that somebody in a brand new relationship would be doing. But he was still married with 2 daughters and a son on the way. Yes, sir.
Can you speak at all to the state of the house? I understand that some of the beds were stripped of the sheets. but
Steve, I'll let you take this one.
Otherwise, they're in disarray.
I'll let Steve take this one.
It was not generally in disarray. There was no obvious signs of a struggle like we see in a lot of houses where something traumatic occurs. The master bedroom bed did not have sheets on it. Those sheets had been taken off and placed, part of them had been placed in the trash can, and then apparently Shanann had been wrapped in one of those sheets, or that sheet had gone with her out to the oil tank and was found by the drone about the same time that he was being interviewed by the FBI and CBI, and that was a key piece of evidence in us connecting the missing persons to him. Was the fact that the sheet from the bed was found out at the oil tank, and that was prior to him confessing that he had taken the bodies there.
Can anybody discuss his reaction when confronted with that evidence?
Go ahead, you want to take that one too?
Yeah, we were getting that information from the drone search at the same time that he's starting to give us some more information about the nature of his relationship with Shanann and the problems that they had been having. We were also getting, or CBI and the FBI were also getting information confirming this other relationship, the girlfriend, about the same time. So all of that was coming together while they were talking to him. That information was being communicated to him, or to the investigators, and they started confronting him with that. And that's ultimately when he changed direction with his story dramatically and asked to speak to his father briefly, and then told the interviewers that at that point he was willing to tell them what happened. And ultimately that is when things changed and he admitted to dumping the bodies in the oil tanks.
Yes, sir.
With what he has admitted in the brief written statement that was read to the court this morning, do you have any sense of how legitimate the remorse Mr. Watts is expressing?
You and I must have seen something different, because I didn't see any remorse on his face at all in the courtroom. I saw somebody who I believe felt truly sorry for himself for the circumstances that he now found himself in. I don't believe that there was any remorse displayed at any point in time for Shanann, Bella, Nico, or Celeste. None. Yeah.
What do you make of the discrepancy between the story he told about strangling, or seeing Shanann strangle the children, versus the fact that he actually smothered them? What do you make of that? It seems like a small discrepancy.
Oh no, that's a very large discrepancy. That is another lie. And I keep emphasizing and using that word. We can't in the courtroom. I can here. I can tell you in no uncertain terms, he lied to investigators, he lied to the media, he lied to the public. The fantastic work that was done by the medical examiner in this case, by the coroner's office, in giving us the information in a very responsible, medically accurate way to be able to say, no, those girls were not strangled. And when he sat there and in that interview demonstrated what he saw her doing, and we know that that's not what happened, it turned into a very large discrepancy in our mind. Yes.
Do we know what Shanann knew about the affair?
We knew that, she knew that there was a lot of suspicious behavior. We knew that she was getting alerts on her phone of credit cards being used at a restaurant in North Denver at a time that she was in North Carolina for amounts of money that one person couldn't probably consume reasonably. We know that she confronted him about that numerous times. We know that he was never completely forthcoming with her, except we don't know exactly what was shared between the two of them in those early morning hours after she got back from Arizona. Yes, sir.
Any reason to believe that the pregnancy had anything to do with the actions taken?
I can't say that it didn't have anything to do with it. We knew that Shanann was very excited about Nico and the upcoming birth. We also know that the reaction of the defendant when he found out was something less than what you would expect a normal, reasonable father to display when he finds out that he's about to have a son. Yes?
Do we know what he used to smother the girls?
No. Beyond his hand, I don't know if there was anything in his hand. What I can tell you is that during the course of the autopsies, there was no fibers or anything like that found in their airways to indicate pillow or blanket or anything like that, so I don't know.
Can you or the medical examiner speak to what you saw in the autopsy that indicated smothering?
I'll let Mr. Blesh.
You would think there would be physical signs that...
There are some physical signs. We are going to distribute the autopsy reports to you. In the interest of balance with the family present, may I suggest that you look at that and you will see what evidence the forensic pathologist could see.
Over the last 100 days, how would you describe personally this case, the toll it's taken on your team, and to where we are today?
I don't know if I accurately can. Steve and I and Patrick have had a lot of conversations along with Dave and everybody else who's worked on this case about how exceedingly difficult it has been. The thing I will tell you that gets us up and gets us moving every day is that family sitting right over there. They have been phenomenal to work with under the most extreme circumstances you can imagine. And when we get to work in the morning and Sandy has called and left us a voice message asking for us to call her, it kind of gets your blood flowing and really wanting to do the best you possibly can for them. There's been a lot of sleepless nights. There's been time away from families. Even when we are home, sometimes we're not exactly there, when we're having to look at some of the most gruesome things you can imagine. But it's been tough, but it's also why we do the job. And even though you didn't ask, I'm going to take an opportunity to say it. Thank you to Frank and Sandy and Frankie for all that you have participated in, all that you have been subjected to. It has been an honor learning a little bit about your family.
Is there anything else within the autopsy that put to light anything we had told you, irrespective of the fact that children were smothered, not strangled, the fact that obviously Shanann was a victim of foul play and something?
I think you hit the most important points in the autopsy as we saw them from a prosecution standpoint. I talked about the injury to Bella that was indicative of being pushed down into those oil tanks, but he had told us that. Those things that I highlighted in court and that we've talked a little bit about here today were the most important factors in our determination that he had in fact committed what we charged him with. Yeah?
This might be another question better for DOC, but do you know where he'll be found?
No. We know that he will head to the Denver Regional Diagnostic Center, obviously in Denver. They will do some evaluations of him, but beyond that, it will be up to DOC as to whether or not he will be housed at a facility here in Colorado or if he'll be moved out of state. That's completely their determination. Other questions? Yes?
What continuing support does Colorado provide for the Rourke family and other people who are classified as victims of the statute?
Sure. There is always the opportunity through the Victims Compensation Program for financial assistance with any counseling needs that are necessary. Most directly, though, if Sandy has any questions or concerns, she can always pick up the phone and call one of us. Yes, sir.
In the evaluation you described that's going to take place before he's incarcerated, if they find anything, mentally quote unquote wrong with him, would that really change how he's going to spend his time or his treatment in incarceration?
It may be something that DOC takes into consideration as to where they'll house him or what kind of programs they'll put him in, but from our perspective, it doesn't change anything that happened today. Yes, sir.
So, on social media, as everyone has seen, there have been all types of rumors
about this case, this August 16th. When we're doing the investigation, were there any other possible people he may have been having relationships with that may have somehow, quote unquote, caused it?
I'm glad you used the word rumor, because I think that's the vast majority of what we saw on social media was just that, false rumor. I'm not aware of any other confirmed relationships that the investigation uncovered which would offer any insight into why this occurred, other than the girlfriend that I talked about this morning. Yes, sir.
Were any social media rumors really disruptive to your process?
All of them are disruptive to our process. And I don't say that crassly. When we are out, when Dave and his team are out conducting interviews of witnesses, and an individual's memory might be tainted by something inaccurate that they read on a social media site, that causes us to think, okay, how much is true of what somebody's saying? What did they see? What did they hear? Or what are they surmising or guessing because of something that they read on social media? Yeah.
Who all did you interview in this investigation? I assume it's a long list. But
Oh, yeah.
What kind of relationship did they have to Shanann?
I can generally tell you that the investigation included interviews of all of Shanann's co-workers, all of her close friends, relatives, co-workers of the defendant, relationships of the defendant, neighbors. Who am I missing? Generally, I think those are the categories. Yeah, family members of both Shanann and the defendant. A long, long list of interviews. I could ask Dave to go through and recite them all, but he might miss some. Any other questions?
Sir?
Yes.
Is it possible that the Music family is something they want to say right now?
I have asked them on the way down. They did not want to make a statement today, and I hope you understand. The statements that they made in court, I think, were probably about as difficult as they could possibly imagine. So I appreciate you asking. They wanted to be here. They just didn't want to make a statement. Yes?
When will the amount of restitution be decided?
It will be an ongoing amount. Within 91 days, we will file a motion with the court asking for any restitution or any cost that we can recover in restitution. As of that 91 days will be asked for and ordered, I presume. There will be ongoing costs, if there are any ongoing counseling or therapy costs, and we will ask the court to keep that, the possibility of future restitution open as well. Yes?
When will the autopsy report session?
As soon as I stop answering questions. Any other questions? Thank you for your time.